The concept of breaking down a wall in horror media is iconic, a display of power to scare the survivors and show off the killer's strength. This sort of gameplay mechanic is seen in many other games too, like Friday the 13th and Left 4 Dead is just some examples. However, in Dead by Daylight, breakable walls come off as more of a hindrance for the killer than an actual way to benefit and speed up the game. Breakable walls were a highly requested feature for years, and the thought of being able to just tear down a wall and go after the survivors just genuinely sounded like such a fun gameplay mechanic. It originally was going to be one of the killer's powers, but was deemed way too technical for the game, so it was ultimately canned. In the Deathslingers chapter, Chains of Hate, they were introduced and met with mixed feelings, as the spots for breakable walls were just underwhelming and not useful to say at the least. But the ability to break them was now in the game, so slowly over time, it could be a core gameplay mechanic, right? While the vast majority of breakable walls are either for god windows or genuinely do nothing for the match, the majority of breakable walls have little to no impact on the game whatsoever for the killer, besides the fact that they are ultimately, in essence, a pre-dropped god palette for survivors. Let me explain. See, most breakable walls don't actually allow the killer to speed up getting from point A to point B, or shutting down a loop by cutting them in half. Most of them are basically next to windows that are incredibly strong. They're honestly more of a map filler than something that was actually thoughtfully implemented into the game, and feels like when they don't know how to fix a loop from being too overpowered, they will just plop in a breakable wall. But the problem with that is now that the killer is actively punished by these walls. See, palettes have a lot of counterplay to them, or ways to play around them, or just some sort of way to connect loops together, so they have a lot of versatility to them. While breakable walls just sort of exist next to a strong window with nothing the killer can really do against it besides going out of their way to break them. And I know what you're already thinking, well, just break the wall, 3head, it's only a 2-second animation. Well, the issue is that just how strong some of the windows these doors are connected to are. But before I get into that, make sure to subscribe and like or add more breakable doors to the game. Anyways, let's look at the other half of breakable doors, which are just god awful and useless. See, while one half of breakable walls are just there to waste time for the killers and give survivors god tier windows, the other half just sort of exist. Like half of them don't even provide a benefit to the killer for breaking them. See, a breakable wall should speed up the process of getting to a survivor and or change up the area so now it plays differently. With that in mind, one map comes into my immediate thought, and it is also criminal for having some of the worst breakable walls in the game in terms of annoyance. That wall I'm talking about is this library wall. I'm not really sure what to call it, but it connects to the library, so I'll call it that. You know, I never thought I'd be talking about the best and worst walls in a video game, but I guess there's a first for everything. Well, like I said, a good breakable wall would change how that section of the map is played when it's broken, and would help the killer more than the survivors when it's broken. This room is an incredible choke point for the survivors, with only 2 ways in. So, what you might be thinking is, well then, why would I want to break the walls if it's just such a good choke point? Well, for trapping killers, if these doors are left up, trapping and zoning becomes way deadlier, being able to easily set up traps at both points, creating a giant amount of pressure trying to get in and trying to get out. Then, if the door is open, it allows the killer to quickly move in and out of the room and hook easier if they wouldn't reach it before. A killer who relies on speed like the Blight, Oni, or Wesker, who can get in this room quicker, now have an easier way in rather than having to run around if you tear down the door. Now, these killers have an easier way to return there and apply pressure to this section of the map since it opens up a quicker way to move between floors at this corner. This is what I'm talking about in terms of perfect wall design. When it's up, it's a stronger zone for the killer, but when broken, it becomes much quicker to move around the map for the killers and the survivors, and allows them to get between points faster. The bad wall design is basically the other 90% of walls. The vast, and I mean vast, majority of wall placements are right next to incredibly strong window locations and turns them into god windows. Again, you might just say, oh, then just break the walls. But wasting time to go out of your way to the wall and break them is just not good. Dead by Daylight is a very time-sensitive game, with the meta constantly being around how fast or how much you can slow down something. So breaking doors is a huge time sink. Along with it being a time waster, it is also just bad map design in the first place. That instead of coming up with a good map or tile design, they'll just drop a breakable wall wherever something is too overpowered. So if your thought is just go and break the wall, if that wall isn't near you when you spawn, like on the opposite side of Groaning Storehouse, you'll be forced to break it when someone goes to use the god window. I just find it very dumb that the killer is basically punished for the survivor getting a god loop, since with a pallet, they're at least on the opposite side of the pallet and are still close by. But with a god window, the survivor can go in a completely new direction for free, and paired with live, it's just a free getaway. So now, let's take a look at some of these god windows I'm talking about. Coal Tower, Groaning Storehouse, Ironwork of Misery, Suffocation Pit, Azerov's Resting Place, Blood Lodge, Gas Heaven, Wretched Shop, Fractured Cowshed, Thompson House, Torment Creek, Disturbed Ward, Father Campbell's Church, Badham Preschool, Dead Dog, Midwich, and Eyrie of Crows are all maps that have strong god windows with breakable walls next to them, just to fix how strong these loops are without them. Obviously, not all these maps are the same in terms of strength with their god windows, but they all have at least one. If you just take a look at some of these, you can see how busted some of these are, with the only counterplay to them being break the wall first. Otherwise, the survivors get a free god window. I don't think this is really healthy for the game at all, since playing against these are non-existent and feels more like a chore than an actual part of the game. See, with palettes, there's a ton that goes into them, even with god palettes, but vaults don't have as much counterplay to them, especially god windows like this. The only thing the killer can really do here is break the door when they eventually get to it, since if you decide to vault it, it's a much slower and eventually they'll just loop back around, turning it into a god loop if you don't break the door. These are also issues with god palettes, but not all maps have god palettes, and the amount of actual god palettes is basically just the game. The amount of god palettes have drastically decreased in the game over time, so now the only thing left are a bunch of god windows. And since most vaults are located on a huge wall, it breaks line of sight and makes it so that projectile killers and killers who rely on line of sight make it much harder to play against. Again, like I said, there is no real counterplay to breakable walls and these god windows. Since if you spawn anywhere on the map that isn't close enough to these god windows, there's nothing you can really do. So then with the survivors loop here, you're just forced to break that window. Like on Father Campbell's Church, what if you spawn in the carnival area? Are you just going to run cross map and specifically go out of your way to destroy the door? No, not really. You'll go looking for the survivors on the generators. Or if you're on Midwich, are you going to go out of your way to destroy all of the doors? Or like Blood Lodge, are you going to go all of your way out to the lodge to go purposely break that door if you spawn on the other side of the map? No, not really. You're going to have to slowly walk all the way over there. As you're playing the game, eventually a survivor or two will run into the lodge, and you'll have to break that window, otherwise it's just too strong. I don't think these breakable walls are healthy for the game at all, since all of these maps also have incredibly strong loops in that same map, like Father Campbell's Church, Eyrie of Crows, Asylum, Cowshed, Dead Dog, etc. These windows just make the loop so unfun to play against, since it takes no brain powers on either side. If you're trying to get Bloodlust, these walls just ruin any and all momentum, since if you're crazy and decide to for some reason not break these walls, then you will waste minutes of time. Again, with these maps, they are notorious for how overpowered they are for survivors. Cowshed is Cowshed, Church and Asylum have some of, if not the most overpowered building in the game for survivors. Eyrie's god windows can lead into tiles and the rest of the map. It's just not fun. It's not fun to watch them run into an area and you know that you have nothing you can do, just like when they run to a god palette. Then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have some of, if not the worst map and wall design in Dead by Daylight. Like seriously, look at these. These provide no benefit to either side, really. These provide no benefit to either side, really. Like they maybe at most shave off a second for the survivors to get to the loop, and they're so out of the way. Hell, some of these walls I didn't even know they existed because nobody actually breaks them. I take 2 seconds to break this door so that survivors can get to pallets and loops faster? Why would anyone ever want to do this? Then there's a few walls that open up meme spots like on Midwich or Dead Dog that exist only for players with about 5 hours to get stuck in there, so why would you ever want to open these? The only map with decent walls I'd say is the game, maybe. These walls basically only exist to help the killer get to a generator in an emergency if they need to, like if it's at 90% and you need to regress it ASAP. And you don't want to run a whole marathon around the map to try and defend it, so you just break open the wall. But then if you do break the wall, it makes it infinitely easier to help the survivors get to the generator and lose some pressure, since you literally open the door for them. This one's a mixed bag, but obviously nowhere near as good as the library one in Midwich. Generally, most of the time, you'd like to leave these doors closed, since on the game, most of these generators are in cramped, cornery rooms, so if you have the doors closed, you're guaranteed a hit or a down in these rooms. But if you have the door open, then they can just walk out of there. So now, in conclusion, the vast majority of breakable walls only serve to exist so that they can add god windows back into the game, but with the catch of, oh, since you can break the walls, technically it's fine. This is just lazy and unfun map design, as it's not really fun to really play against at all. Because they don't want to design a fun loop that has lots of different routes you can play it like 4 lanes or TL wall, they just slap a breakable door next to it because it's just easier for them that way. I do wish that they would make breakable walls more intuitive, as giving the killer more potential to break down the map and change the way survivors have to loop and play tiles sounds extremely fun. They would have to waste their time breaking the wall if they want to make it weaker, or depending on the killer, they could leave it up to set traps. This would reward killers who are slower in chase and don't really have as strong chase potential, as they could tear down a loop and make it shorter. Someone like Skull Merchant tearing a loop in half so that they can easily catch up to the survivor faster instead of having to play a whole loop. But how they are now is just for God windows, so there really is no thought behind it because it's either break this wall or you spend 3 minutes getting looped in Father Campbell's church. Like seriously, I fucking hate this main building so much more than any other main map in the game. It is just not balanced at all. Fuck this map. And with that, it's your boy, Donut Boy, signing off. Have yourselves a damn good one. Peace.